think snatching defeat from the jaws of victory is like the most perfect way to describe this. And I'm going to do a slightly annoying, like, here's how we got here. The House of Representatives.
Make sure it's in your most pandering voice.
All my voices are pandering. It's just a question of who.
True.
That's the mark of a true lobbyist. Someone in the room needs to be influenced, and I'm going to take the tone. But the House of Representatives passed 6 funding bills. Like, we all know this. We're aware of it. This is half of the government funding, and we're just waiting for the Senate to vote on it. But what the House did is they voted on them in blocks. So they did 2, and then they did 3, and then they did 1. And those were the bills. There was a bill that included 2, there's a bill that included 3, and a bill that was 1 by itself. And that was DHS. I think we all know why DHS got its own special vote all by itself. And it was a terrible vote. It was 227 to 220, like, or something along those lines. I might have the numbers exactly wrong, but it's a 7-vote margin. It barely passed. And then they took all 6 of those bills via some house magic in the Rules Committee and sent them over as a single thing. So the Senate is going to attempt to vote on one single bill that owns all 6 of them. And we all know what's about to happen because we all know how the DHS vote is going to go. And all they had to do, I mean, the House literally said, you know what, for us, we're going to break it off. I don't want to vote on that and ruin the other bills. And they said to the Senate, said, you guys should. Fuck you. And that's where we are now. And the half the government is going to shut down when we vote tomorrow, when the Senate votes tomorrow on all 6 bills combined, because unsurprisingly, half of our government cannot vote for DHS funding right now without some assurances, or their constituents are going to revolt against them.
Simon, do you think that has something to do with stuff going on in Minneapolis?
It could have something to do with the recent demonstrations in Minneapolis and what some have described as a potentially heavy-handed federal presence. But we don't need to get into the details of that.
I think we can say quite definitively that Minneapolis has been the focal point of energy.
100%.
Resulting in this situation. And
every governor in America is being demanded that they comment on it. Like, why does the Virginia governor need to comment?
It's almost the most heavy-handed federal intervention that we may have seen in our lifetimes. Like it's heavy. Like, this is very heavy. I don't know, like South Central LA riots in the 90s, maybe, which is a long, long time ago for most people
the thing,
in America.
Like, let's not forget, there's a great clip going around right now of old Dave Matthews singing down in Mexico. And he's saying Ohio by Neil Young. So, like,
sure,
depending on how old you are, the federal government was shooting kids on college campuses during their lifetime, right? So it's not...
Or the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, 68. I mean, like, there are lots of it, but I mean, I'm talking in our recent lifetime, this might be the thing. And I agree. There are other things like the Occupy movement and the weird Chaz stuff in Seattle, Portland, all that stuff that happened. But like, we didn't see this level. And I think this is uniquely intense, and I think rightly is precipitating political obstruction and delays, right? I think that is the natural response here. I'm not taking a position, right, wrong, whatever. I'm just saying this seems to be the natural response to something that is getting justified national grade attention.
So I think, I mean, it's not a shock. I worked for a Democrat senator for a long time. Folks know that I am left of center on the dial. However, I get really concerned when people talk about this like this is the most dire version of America. I'm like, not even close, buddy. We have a very difficult history. And I think the internet really exacerbates this, like, oh, we're living through such terrible times. Like, no, we're not. We're living through the kindest, gentlest version of this. Because there was a time where the police wouldn't even pretend in certain parts of America, and like, it would look very different. So things are bad. I'm not saying things are good, but we're not at like the bottom of the arc of American political turmoil by any means. Not even close. We fought a civil war. Hundreds of thousands of people died in it. Like, it's been worse. That being said, we're going to shut down. And the only off ramps that I see theoretically coming out of this for like a real shutdown is once the government shuts down, I think Congress and the executive branch are going to have to do some pretty serious public forensics on some of these federal shootings that have happened in Minneapolis. And I think they're going to have to change that DHS bill to reflect the findings of those investigations. And that's going to take time. So I do not understand mechanically why we do not split off the DHS bill, fund the rest of the fucking government, and be adults about this. It boggles the mind. I just don't get it. But I encourage everyone to reach out to their senators and congressmen and make their opinions heard.
I'm of the opinion that even though it looks chaotic and crazy, and we would wish for better, that the American Democratic Republic seems to be functioning, even if at a low level. And we're going to see. I mean, this is going to be a crazy, intense year with the midterms looming. And that is the time when the American people really make their voice heard in the Republic.
What's pretty funny about it is, like, from a congressional, like, how's your government functioning perspective, we're doing much better at funding the government this year than we did last year, where there was like no end in sight and we gave up and did a full CR. So we have funded half the government, and like we're on track to do 11 out of 12 pretty easily. I think the obvious solution is break off DHS, put that under a CR, and do some investigations, and like do your due diligence.
Well, with this as the starting note for the podcast, kind of dire. Welcome to the Goat Rodeo. I'm Garrett Smith, your co-host, lead co-host, host. What am I? I'm one of those words. And I'm joined by regular co-host Simon Kuhn and Dave Cottle. We're all from Reveal. We talk about geopolitics, the defense venture scene, technology, and the defense innovation uptake scenario for the West. And we do it with style, I'll say. Steez. We're a steezy podcast. So Simon, building on the opener, January 30th, 2 days from the time we're recording, 1 day from the time this podcast goes live, the government's scheduled to shut down in the event, even a limited shutdown in the event that these appropriations bills are not passed and signed. You're saying shutdown is going to happen. How long is it going to go?
I love a pessimistic prediction because I feel safer when I am being dire. We're shutting down. There's no scenario where those bills pass.
Sure, but how long? Like, what do you think?
How long is much tougher. So this speaks to, like, how do you break off the DHS bill from this larger bill? And the one way that you could do it very quickly if they were motivated, but you need unanimous consent in the Senate to do it. So Thune, the leader of the Senate, could say, all right, I'm requesting unanimous consent to break this bill off, and we'll do just the other 5. And that means that any one senator can stand up and say, nope, I don't agree. I want to, like, go through a whole procedural process. So if you had unanimous consent, you could turn that around very quickly, and we could tee up another vote in a matter of days. Like, they could reopen the government by Sunday if they decide that's the method they want to go. They're not going to get unanimous consent. A couple of senators, notably Mike Lee of Utah, has said, I'm not going to agree to that. We need to vote on them all together. And there's like a negotiating tactic there that I can understand to some degree. It's very cynical, right? I want to fund THS, and I will hold everybody else hostage to vote on it. So if Thune gets to a place where he goes, hey, we don't have the time, we need to break it off, he's going to have to go through a whole, like, 60 vote threshold just to break that one off of the package because it's already sitting on the floor. It can't happen, like, behind closed doors. So we'll have to go through a vote to break it up, and then another vote to pass what we have broken up. If you run the full clock, that probably takes 5 days, unless you make all the senators stay there through Saturday and Sunday, which I would love to see. I think the obvious thing, and like the thing that politicians probably owe to the American people, is to stay in D.C. and vote on solutions until you
figure it out.
Yeah,
totally. Yeah.
I'm not sure they're going to do that or not. I don't know. The House is out of session, and that's a negotiating tactic too. Like, they very specifically left so that if the Senate changes the bill, it can't pass into law because we're not here. So it'll go slow. So the fastest way is just to vote on what we sent to you. It's not going to happen. There's no way. Minneapolis is too toxic. You cannot vote yes on that thing as one big block. You have to break it up. So it'll be touch and go. I don't think it lasts long. I would put.
We're saying like 2 weeks? What are you saying?
Maybe 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
That's probably where I would stick it. So it just kind of depends on whether or not they're like, okay, we're going to break it up, we'll pass 5 and then we'll fight over DHS? Or are they going to say, okay, let's amend DHS right now and see if we can get you to yes, which I think is ludicrous to do that without an investigation, to be clear. But we'll have to see what the strategy is.
So, Dave, we're looking at maybe a short shutdown period where our defense acquisitions counterparts are variably furloughed or overtasked or delayed or bottlenecked or whatever. What are you forecasting in the event that in a day and a half's time from now we're in a shutdown scenario and we've got to hustle and figure this out? What are you doing?
Yeah, so the implications, or standard implications that I think apply here, it's most civilian DoD staff, it's program managers, contracting officers, legal, HR, finance, PEO staff offices. It's certainly not fun. 2 weeks is recoverable. I wouldn't say that a 2-week shutdown drives a new strategy, and we're going to go only exclusively after multi-year funds or start treating defense primes that have multi-year funds as our principal go-to-market strategy. We'll probably just weather the storm for those 2 weeks, have frank conversations with all of our customer counterparts right now, and just be poised to go back doing business when the government reopens. I think 2 weeks is relatively low impact. 6 months is problematic, and probably
unlike the last one, there's a very clear path forward here for 5 out of 6 agencies that are still waiting for funding. When they voted on, typically DoD and HHS are the most difficult bills. The Republicans really like DoD, Democrats really like HHS. That bill passed through the House by a 80 or 90 vote margin. I think everyone is ready to vote on everything else and send it out the door. So any length of shutdown that goes beyond a handful of days is fully the fault of the politicians not trying to come to the table.
Yep.
Whereas I feel like we were at a weird impasse earlier, and there didn't seem to be a clear, this is what we want, this is where we want to go. There's a very this is exactly what needs to happen. All you got to do is do it.
The possible solution scenarios could be amending and massaging and negotiating and horse trading so that we get the appropriations bills done and we move forward after a week or two or whatever that is. In previous years, we've seen one of the go-to kind of easy button solutions being full year CR or continuing resolutions. Is that even in the cards if you're reading the tea leaves? No.
No
Okay.
Democrat on earth
Why?
is going to vote to let the DHS have $1 of funding without some kind of safeguards, some kind of you're going to have to feed the political beast here in some way. I personally think that the smart move is a short CR, 3 months, something like that, maybe even less, to have congressional hearings and do the thing. And that, I think, will draw the venom out of the conversation in a big way, hopefully. But I don't there's no amount of promises, which is what we saw last time. Essentially, the Democrats caved on shutdown under the promise that we would have votes on ACA subsidies. I don't think anyone's going to take that deal again. I think all of the Democrats, except for Fetterman, that voted to open the government last time, have come out very aggressively, and I'm not voting to fund DHS. And also, DHS has 5 times its annual budget sitting in the bank account because of reconciliation. So even if you shut down DHS, they've got the money to keep the lights on and running, which is what DoD did during shutdown, right? They burned through that reconciliation funding and some RDT&E funding in order to pay the troops and yada, yada, yada. So there is no government catastrophe coming for DHS in the short term because of that $75 billion in reconciliation dollars. It's not 5 years; it's 2 years worth of operating costs sitting in the bank account. So yeah, you're going to have to do something with that bill. And I don't see any logical reason to hang up 5 out of the 12 bills on the negotiations that need to happen there. And they're extraordinary. No one foresaw how bad this was going to get this fast. It's political malfeasance to tie everyone else to that rock and throw it in the river.
The 3-month CR doesn't actually concern me that much. I mean, usually the issue with CRs, okay, funding levels stay the same. There's not a ton more money, but largely at our level, that's going to be relatively low impact. The thing with CRs is usually no new starts or no new awards that we're waiting on.
Yeah.
Since we've got good, healthy contracts, some with multi-year money, we're just essentially adding work to them to solve customer problems.
We just don't
I can
need
still do
to.
that. I can still do that in a CR environment.
You know, I mean, like we have voted and passed 6 of the funding bills through both chambers. There's no reason why we can't take those 5 bills that are agreed upon and send them out the door. It's I just don't understand how we got to such like a draconian place.
Well, regardless what happens, and we hope it's at minimum Congress doing a job and meeting kind of the minimum requirements that the American people ask of them. A notable item in our worldview is that the 2026 National Defense Strategy was released last week on the 23rd. And I think it's notable for a few different reasons. One, it seems to shift significantly from the explicit counter China kind of centrality that we saw in the previous national defense strategy, away from what I think analysts are calling a global integration footing to a fortress America footing. In other words, kind of retrenching Western Hemisphere, you know, strength and deterrence, not open confrontation. Dave, this was your topic. What are for you? What are the things you're pulling out of this, and what are the trickle down effects of this, like this keystone national defense strategy document? How does it manifest itself all the way down into the national defense posture, and maybe all the way down to folks like us operating in the defense innovation technology equipping ecosystem?
Yeah, good question. I think you hit the high notes, right? My takeaways were homeland defense is now number one. China still matters; it's still mentioned in there, but not as the number one priority. Allies must carry more of the load. Defense industrial base reinvigoration is strategic. Geographic key terrain is explicitly the Panama Canal, Greenland. It's the Western Hemisphere. Less focus on sort of the endless wars, regime change that we it's a political hot topic, and explicit rejection of sort of global interventionalist in general. I think this is a really important document, or it has been historically. I'm pretty sure Simon's going to challenge me on that. But the way this is supposed to work is this is the capstone document. This is the guidance to the U.S. military, to the most powerful military in the history of the planet, of how they're going to think and prioritize and arm themselves or train or modernize against it. And in theory, all of the commands and all of the services take this document and write their own plan as to how they're gonna meet that guidance. So that trickles down for me. And we used to spend a lot of time and energy supporting operations in South America. And while all the attention of a lot of these units was on Europe, or a lot of them on APAC or Indo-PACOM, I think now I'm going to start walking into rooms, and U.S. military customers are going to be more concerned about ConOps and applications of my technology or my products in the Western Hemisphere than they used to be in the Asian Pacific, or applications in and around like Ukraine, and Eastern Europe. I think that's really, like, there's a little bit of realignment of the ConOps, the products, and probably the map of the customers. I actually don't know, and I hope Simon will comment on if that actually drives changes in resources the way that it used to. But that's the real question: is, does Indo-PACOM stop being the belle of the ball, and now it's Northcom and Southcom?
Simon, before we hit record, we talked a little bit about Elbridge Colby, who's a senior political appointee in the Defense Department, or the War Department. He's the Undersecretary of War, Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, and was brought in, I think, because of his work in previous roles around strength and deterrence, and a refocusing or reprioritizing toward the Indo-Pacific and the China threat, and away from other strategically important places, historically, Middle East, Europe, etc. I think you made the comment that maybe this national defense strategy, because of its reduction in explicit identification of China as the thing, the main rival or whatever, that perhaps his star was in decline. I gotta say, I think that Bridge Colby is actually pretty central here. I think he was the primary author of this 2026 NDS, and he's pretty visible on the world stage. I just looked this up. He's done high profile visits in the last month to Europe, to South Korea, to Japan. to me, it seems almost like this is him. Like this is maybe his strategy of denial or deterrence manifest in the NDS. And I think he might actually be getting exactly what he was mostly recommending in some of those documents. Do you feel differently?
So, I mean, he is certainly one of the primary authors because that's statutorily what his role is in the DoD.
I mean, but he could be fired if his star was in decline. They could fire him or sideline him. He actually seems like he's fairly central, and it still is that. Let's reprioritize. We can't do everything everywhere all at once. Which is kind of the neocon perspective in past Republican administrations. Anyway, sorry, I may have interrupted you.
So first of all, the NDS is fascinating this go round for a number of reasons, but I think not the least of which is despite this pivot and what they say is important, there's no real direction for a change in force structure. So you're like, per the NDS, you're still going to see like 4% of the US military focused on homeland security-esque missions. And if they do something differently, that'll be different from the NDS. If only 4% of your military is directed towards that, your resourcing is not going to look like this massive shift towards this hemisphere. I also don't know that you need a massive resourcing shift to this hemisphere. I take a lot of, I think with a grain of salt, the idea that we really need to refocus on a hemisphere where we can, within a month's notice, kidnap the head of a nation that we don't like, along with his wife, and suffer zero casualties. We always have been, and still to this day are the dominant force in this hemisphere. And I don't think anything has changed that. And I actually think that for a long time, and still to this day, that underpins our ability to focus on places like Indo-PACOM in Europe. So I feel like a certain amount of redundancy in this idea that we need to refocus. From everything I've seen, we are still by far, by many orders of magnitude, the biggest kid on the playground, many times over. Maybe that's deteriorating in ways that I don't see, and it really begets this refocus. I'm more interested in the president's budget. Last year's budget did not reflect this strategy in a very large way, with the exception of Golden Dome. I think that's probably the most significant place where I see alignment between resources and strategy here. I see Rubio's fingerprints all over this more than I see Bridge Colby, though. I think the kind of intellectual speaking, and even now, Bridge Colby is visiting all these foreign allies, which are diminished heavily in this strategy. So if Bridge is leading the charge, I find it fascinating that he would be out abroad leading the charge when the NDS is basically saying, "Hey, you guys, you're not pulling your weight, and we're not." And this is the message from the Trump admin for a while. That's not new. It's part of why Bridge was brought around. But if the focus of the national defense strategy is the homeland, one would assume that your champions for this NDS are going to be here at the homeland talking about how things are different here now. Maybe I'm reading that wrong, but I'm mostly concerned about the ambiguity in the next president's budget request. Obviously, the president said he wanted to go up to $1.5 trillion. We saw way less than that in the last president's budget request. And so I don't, where the rubber meets the road for me is, okay, if this is the focus, are you going to go gut all these innovation programs that are focused on Indo-PACOM and dump it on, base security and counter drone in America and all that good stuff? Maybe it happens, but I doubt it. I severely doubt it. One thing this NDS does not do is it does not really talk about specific innovative technologies that we're concerned about. It talks a lot about the industrial base, which great, totally get that, but it's not talking about these, and these are the things we want our industrial base to build. So I think there's a chance that maybe you see significant resources put into Defense Production Act or different aspects of the DoD budget that could really plus up the industrial base. But this feels way more political than past NDSs have. It also feels like obviously it's a very aggressive break from even the first Trump NDS. The priorities are totally different. But I think this is the first NDS I've ever read that talks about our allies' social program spending. Like we're sending a much different set of message than we usually send. And I think the message is the point more than anything. I don't think it's about rewiring DoD resources and changing our force structure and posture. I'd be shocked if that changes dramatically.
Well, I don't know that my assertion here is that it changes dramatically immediately. This document's typically it's a 2 to 4 year leading indicator. That's why that's why it's published every 4 years. I think it's because this
statutorily supposed to be as soon as possible. The Biden admin took like 92 weeks to put theirs out, but most admins it takes like 50-ish weeks. Usually takes like the first year just to write their first NDS.
Sure, but I think that we, in the last year or two, we have seen, funding decisions, resourcing decisions, prioritization decisions that were based on the last NDS. If we really think about whether that's because the NDS got folks talking about it, or whether the services and the combatant commands address their plans off of it or aligned with it, I expect that 2 to 4 years there is resource realignment, and to your point, it might just be Golden Dome. There is some resource realignment too.
I think that's a big question,
which is actually interesting because with midterms looming and then a presidential election coming in 2.5 years, there's every chance this kind of like slowly kind of trickles down and it starts shaping things, or maybe it's just rhetorical and philosophical and positioning or whatever. And all of a sudden Trump's no longer on the scene. 2028, January 2029, new president's on the scene. They publish a new NDS, and who knows, maybe it just snaps back to kind of like business as usual or something more resonant with a previous, worldview. I don't really know. It is interesting to me that the kind of reassurance and endless kind of blank check kind of position that we've had in the past with allies and willingness to intervene is now much more explicitly transactional partnerships, right? It is, here is how, this is me trying to embody the Trump administration and its communications with the world. Here's what we want, and we want you to do more, and we're going to do less until you do more. And then we're also going to showcase model citizen type, partners that are actually pulling their weight, and outline a few of them and their good behaviors. And you've got this kind of like carrot stick transactional thing going on that is very much in line with the character of this administration, domestic and international, right? I think that is it. And so transactional, I think, is kind of the mode of engagement here.
And I think that's going to be a tricky thing for particularly troops to execute. That is, transactional has not been the character in which we have told service members, particularly even to include 2- and 3-star generals that are like out there interacting with partners at very senior levels on a regular basis, like the UCOM commander. That's a tough line to walk. That's also a really big shift from decades of how the U.S. has handled policy at that level. So I think it'll be interesting to see, and I'm not at all trying to imply that the generals are going to defy the NDS, but I don't think they were raised to execute this kind of NDS. So I think just like with acquisition reform, you're probably going to see some disparities in execution and enforcement from people who are going to get it and embrace it, and other folks who are like, I don't even know what to do with this. How do I become transactional with these like Danes, for example, that I've been training arm in arm with for years under this hypothetical like Russia fight? And like, how do I transact now? Like, how do I switch to that?
Dave, there's going to be plenty of room for interpretation as this thing kind of moves its way down into the services, right? And so every service, in the same way that Simon's referring to with the acquisition reform stuff, where the Army was very forward leaning, and then we expect the Navy and the Air Force to do kind of minimal adjustments, and the Marine Corps will fast follow. I'm air quotes here, fast follow its way into the future, or be dragged kicking and screaming into the future, which is the Marine Corps that I know. So anyway, I think it's reasonable to expect that as this NDS trickles down rhetorically, philosophically, materially into the services, that we're going to see significant disparities in what happens, right?
Absolutely. You can't remove the human element of this. Some folks will take it. Some folks will continue on doing business as they have been doing business, or as have always done doing business. Some folks will take it very seriously, and they'll use it as the thing to point to, which is, this is why my priority list is the way that it is, or this is why I'm moving these requirements or this modernization priority, and not the other one. I think the EABO, like the United States Marine Corps 2030 plan, is probably a pretty good example of this, right? So the last NDS gets published, and then the United States Marine Corps writes, this is how the United States Marine Corps is going to operate in 2030, which had explicit even acquisition implications to it. If you're not talking about how I'm going to make 6 Marines sitting on an island by themselves in the Asian Pacific more effective at locking down a shipping lane, we don't care. So it's sort of impossible to predict, but I think that there will be a portion of the acquisitions layer that we deal with that will start taking it seriously, at least for their PPBE, their palming, their planning of what sort of problems they're going to address. And I think it's more likely that the list of problems that the Southcom commander is facing, for example, are going to start getting more attention.
Okay, well, we'll see how this trickles down. We got big stuff, right? Shutdown / appropriation cycle. The next cycle's coming online. NDS is going to start trickling down. Meanwhile, President Xi Jinping in China completely decapitates the Joint Staff and the Central Military Commission. This is news because whenever purges like this happen, and this is relatively common in totalitarian authoritarian states where, there's a lot of nepotism, a lot of personal kind of sentiment, friendship, and install of your friend base and everything else. This is the first time in a very long time, and I think the second time ever, that the sitting Central Military Commission vice chairman has been ousted since the Cultural Revolution. We're talking like 60 years, right? This is a 60, 70 years of history that is being relatively upended. So the first ranked vice chairman, General Zhang Youxia, has been ousted, along with General Liu Zhenli, which is significant, right? So, Simon, your comment before we started recording was, when you decapitate, the key leadership layer of your military, it's probably because you think things are going badly, or you think that you can't accomplish a thing that you are setting out to accomplish. And let's just pretend that the Chinese actually want to take Taiwan. And let's say that that's like one of the many big kind of strategic things that President Xi wants to be prepared to do if he wanted to do it, right? This might, through some lenses, be a statement that the Chinese military and the Chinese national security apparatus is not prepared, not adequately prepared in the eyes of the general secretary, in the eyes of the president, that they would be able to do that. So this is a decapitation to get back onto a strategically executable pathway. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, my instinct, my knee-jerk instinct is, Xi Jinping thinks that these people are incompetent and has to get rid of them because they can't execute what he wants. The flip side of that, as I calm down and I think more deeply and I think about, the only good example that I have, which is the American military.
You seem very calm, though. At all times, you seem to be cool,
very
calm,
level-headed.
Very level-headed.
I mean, you think about all the great military crises of America when we're at war. Famously, purge our senior leadership over and over until we find the guys that can do it right. So there is a flip side version of this where maybe Xi Jinping thinks of this as, we're at war and you're not taking it seriously. I'm going to carve this away until I find my Grant and my Sherman that are ready to go bleed on the shores of Taiwan.
Yeah,
this is a very dark version that I just came up with.
That's a very interesting comparison. I mean, and probably not inappropriate. Go ahead, Dave.
I mean, one of the major complaints, and Dave, I'm going to let you go after this. One of the major complaints I think a lot of folks have said about China's military structurally is they're not an expeditionary military. They haven't really been to war. They don't have this professional officer class in the same way that America does, but they've certainly been trying to build one. And so there's an argument to be made that getting rid of these princeling, graybeard sons of the revolution to make way for officers that were just raised to be professional military men might be one of the mechanisms by which China is going to try to modernize its military to go fight an actual war.
So, Simon, do you think it's because it's perceived as being the wrong team or incapable or incompetent, or do you think it's because it's a paper tiger or perceived to be a paper tiger, right? So
hard to tell, right? It's hard to tell.
This purge screams to me like our modernization might kind of be BS. But the way that I think about this playing out is, I want you to take Taiwan. We, need some more preparation time to do that. No, I want you to do it. well, maybe there's been some, leadership skimming money from missile programs. Maybe we're lying a little bit about readiness. Maybe we don't quite have the military that we've been reporting to you, or the capabilities we're reporting.
Could also be, hey, America doesn't look like they're willing to fight for Taiwan. Now's a great save time to clean house and build whatever we want. Because I mean, if I'm China, I'm not taking seriously the military threat in a Taiwan operation. The threat in a Taiwan operation is the geography of Taiwan, and
Yeah.
that's kind of it, right? Like,
Totally.
but it's certainly not the depth of the American magazine to withstand Chinese missiles in the Strait.
Not
So
not not just
pretty big.
geography of Taiwan, right? Like they would expect to encounter a very strong insurgent resistance there, right? Like
Totally.
there's been now many, many years of Western led propping up of and training up of local resistance capability, right? Asymmetric type capability on the island. I don't think China, after watching the United States and others get bogged down in foreign insurgent operations, I don't think they want to be fighting a forever insurgency on the island where it will become obvious that the only way to do this in the Chinese way is to absolutely quash it in the way that they've done for Uyghurs in Xinjiang and other stuff, right? So they cannot handle absorbing that kind of criticism. They don't want to get bogged down in that way. They don't think that they're capable, all those things. There are three other kind of explanations here, maybe four I want to throw out there, and maybe it's a hybrid of all these things, but first, there have been some real scandals in the Chinese military industrial base, to include nuclear and procurement scandals, right? There was that story a couple of years ago where there was a little bit of house cleaning around the Strategic Rocket Force, I think it is what it's called, the SRF. I could be
20
getting that
generals
wrong.
fired in the last 2 years.
Right. And that specific instance that I'm referencing is that there were reports that nuclear fuel had been drained from some of these missiles and replaced with water because they couldn't maintain it appropriately, or they were skimming budget off the top to, line their pockets and whatever else. So there have been some legitimate scandals, right, that undermine discipline, undermine combat capability, undermine force projection, undermine the state at some level. The second, and I don't think we've talked about this in the past, but there's this princeling rivalry. So Simon, you mentioned the princelings, the princeling effect. Chinese revolution that happened in the early 20th century, there were revolutionary heroes that have been idolized in the same way that we do for our founding fathers. President Xi and many others of his generation are the direct, second generation beyond the hero class of that revolutionary set. General Zhang, the CMC vice chairman who was fired, was a fellow princeling, was childhood friends with Xi Jinping. And so there's this idea that there might be a rivalry between the upper echelons of this princeling caste, where President Xi is consolidating power, as we've seen over the last 15 years, right? This is the authoritarian impulse, and saw a fellow princeling as a potential rival. And then another is that many of the current or late set of Chinese leadership have come from the Chinese province of Fujian. That includes President Xi and many, many others. And I think that that this latest kind of house cleaning, this latest decapitation, kind of removed all of the existing Fujian princeling or potential rivalry set, which indicates that perhaps not even like personal relationships and the sentiment that exists between the princeling folks, not even that as protection in the personalization and consolidation of power in President Xi's China. I think this is pretty devastating. This is certainly, like, the Chinese state is not about to collapse. Their economy is suffering in a certain number of ways that I think you could go out and research. The demography is a little bit wonky, and a lot of criticisms around survivability of the regime given some of these dynamics. But this is not a regime or a country on the verge of collapse unless something catastrophic and unexpected happened to President Xi. But eventually, when he ages out and there needs to be a transfer of power, he's going to run into the same thing that every other, serious high consolidation autocrat runs into, is what do you do with succession so that your country doesn't devolve into chaos, right? This is what we're seeing with the Ayatollah in Iran. This is what happens every time there's any hint that a North Korean leader is going under. This is Hugo Chavez, Nicolas Maduro's Venezuela. I mean, it almost, this is Stalin, right? I mean, so all of these types of events are not good. I mean, it's not good now, but it's definitely not good in the 10 or 15 years from now when President Xi is aging out and a succession plan needs to go into effect. I think this is the danger zone, as Sterling Archer would say.
I just want to take this opportunity to say that I think there's no chance China takes Taiwan in 2027. Is my hard and fast prediction.
I mean, it doesn't seem likely. Doesn't seem likely given the decapitation that we just saw. Certainly,
I got to get on Polymarket now. I've been on this boat for a while, and I should have placed my bet already, but no fucking way.
Go for it. Okay, let's talk a bit about some venture deal book stuff now that we've solved all of the other big problems in the world. Let's talk about let's talk about the defense venture landscape. A report last week came out from yet another venture capital firm, Bessemer Venture Partners. They've been around for a while. They're the origin of the Bessemer Index, which is how you get that 10x next 12-month revenue SaaS multiple on enterprise valuation and a bunch of other stuff. They're kind of a semi-legendary venture capital firm out of Silicon Valley. They have generated a report called Defense Tech Roadmap, 5 Frontiers for 2026. They, like so many other firms, are getting very interested in, frothy about the defense technology market. They're tracking a number of trends that I think are useful and interesting. I point people toward this and other kind of similar reports from other outfits out there to get this kind of venture investor perspective on the market. But the key item here is that capital markets seem to be validating defense innovation with unprecedented private multiples. So the enterprise value of this upstart grouping of companies, private and public, seems to be hot, potentially valid. Maybe it lives all the way through to IPO. There have been a number of direct listings and IPOs in the market that seem to underpin this very hot multiple scenario. The high growth defense sector is apparently outperforming the S&P 500 and legacy defense primes. You can look at legacy defense prime stock performance in the recent year. With the exception of the Trump announced $1.5 trillion defense budget positive bump that most of them got, most have been on a downward trend because of the market sentiment about a lack of innovation and a lack of viability moving into the future. But on the other end of the spectrum, Palantir, public for a good number of years now, is still trading at 65x next 12-month revenue, which is an insane multiple in the public markets, but it really underpins a lot of this activity. And we're just talking about like a couple of these examples. So I have prognosticated in our discussions here on the Goat Rodeo that I think that we're either in a plateau scenario as we wait for some of the big payoffs, or it's going to heat up. And I'm leaning more toward heating up. I think this is going to get hotter over the next couple of years because real contracts will be awarded. Some significant and real exits and liquidity events are going to happen, both public listings and M&A activity, as we kind of cross into the second decade of serious defense venture activity. All of that being said, they put together a 5 critical frontier areas report. I'll kind of hit these one by one and or I'll list them out and then see what you guys have to say by way of comment. The first is that autonomy moves from concept to combat. I don't know if that's true. That might be a venture perspective on the idea that AI and automation technologies are actually transitioning into combat. The second is that AI is permeating, this is their word, permeating Department of War workflows. I actually don't believe that's true. I think there's a lot of aspirational talk about it. There have been some big contracting activities with OpenAI and others deploying AI or language models into workflows within the Department of War and the rest of the national security apparatus. I don't know if that's true. A third is that advanced manufacturing and kind of a reindustrialized movement underpinned by performance enhancements and innovation in those areas is kind of coming online. I sure hope that's true. I don't know if it's true, but I sure hope that's true. Edge and network resilience. This is a place where our company Reveal cares a lot, puts a lot of our attention and generates a lot of heat and energy. It's about pushing capability out to the edge endpoints where decisions and risk are made and adopted. And So we care a lot about that. Network resilience obviously has been tested in the China-Russia affair, where electronic warfare jamming realities are making planners, acquisition professionals seriously rethink what capabilities and resilience need to look like. And finally, the last is kind of supply chain around energy and materials, critical resources and materials. So I've been on a run here. Thoughts on those 5 focus areas or trends in the market?
So we, all of the companies that are called out there, we've interacted with almost everything on this list, even only tangentially. And
Man, Dave, I feel like a hot take is coming, like a statement. Just drop it.
All right. So I agree with those 5 areas. I agree with some of the call outs for companies. I would agree with all of that if it said by 2030 or 2032. A lot of that stuff, it's really, those problems are really hard, and the solutions have to be really robust in military applications. So I think we're talking about autonomous systems and generative AI having a much larger impact this year than it's actually going to have. Period.
So future year, I actually like that read on this. It's and again, the venture industry is all about aspirational. They very rarely talk about realities or historicals. I mean, they factor it in for sure, but they like to live in this aspirational visionary state. So I tend to agree with you. I think this is aspirational. And and to give the Bessemer folks credit, whichever analyst actually wrote this report, it's frontiers for 2026. In other words, this is kind of like what's coming, right? These are things to watch in the coming years. I don't know if they're making claims that these are the companies that have actually revolutionized anything yet.
So
but
these
are the ones. Yeah,
they fully are. I'm looking at the splash page, and there's a big bold headline that says national security now runs on startup innovation. Bullshit.
Yeah.
Bullshit.
They are.
$1 trillion is going to the nuclear enterprise. The biggest thing in missile defense is the Golden Dome, named after a capability designed in 2005.
Right.
What dynamic? And who do you think the big winner is? It's Raytheon. We're doing a lot of good stuff, but national security does not run on startup innovation. We are still very much insurgents trying to make folks operate better. It makes it sound like startups are the engine of national security. We are the bells and whistles right now. Very much. And we have aspirations to do better. But that sentence specifically, get out of here.
I love that take, because as we know, what's the number? This might just be like cited so often that it's not, but it's not actually real. It's just one of those kind of like heuristics that people believe. But like 1% of the entire DoD budget is spent on non-traditional contractors.
I bet we're up to like 2% now.
2%, sure.
Maybe like 3%. Like I'm sure. I bet you it's grown since that statistic came out, and lots of good stuff is happening. But boy, I don't buy that one. I do think, to your earlier point, it is heating up, and I think probably for as long as this administration is in power, it will continue to heat up. I don't think we're going to see a $1.5 trillion defense budget, but if we see 1.2, that's a huge jump, and that's rising tides for all ships. And I think the thing that a lot of folks really confuse is when the tides rise and these startup ships start to rise, they think that the primes sink while it happens, as if they're not snatching up companies. The real winners, and I've been saying this a long time, is the middle tier. It's the AVs, it's the Kratos, it's these folks that are smart enough to go, oh, I'm going to buy up a bunch of these startups and like integrate you into my platform so that I can grow from being a middle player into being truly competitive. And you're going to see some unicorns, and I bet you the unicorns are skewing the numbers. I bet you Anduril and Palantir are way dragging the average far to the right, or the median far to the right.
Yeah.
Like,
no
doubt about that happening. Right.
And SpaceX and other stuff.
So I get what we're doing here. I love the optimism, but I'm not optimistic. I'm a pessimist, and my pessimist take is you're blowing smoke. But so let's build it. You're blowing smoke for now, but I do want to build it.
So to be clear, just so that we're being fair, and I'm not always fair to venture capital firms, because I have an opinion here on that industry. But the headliner or the sub-headline here is that defense tech has advanced more in the past 24 months than in the previous 3 decades, with startups leading the charge on key pillars of innovation. So like I don't think that the report is necessarily saying that startups are like the lead they are just leading sort of an innovative energy here. And there's definitely like, I use this word a lot, but I think it's rhetorical energy, right? There's kind of like a shade casting going on for legacy players, and there's an innovative kind of mandate or energy that startups embody in a way that legacy players just can't. But I agree with you. I think the big winners over time are going to be legacy players, specifically from that middle set, maybe private equity folks, enabling it in the same way that we described that, or Simon, that you described that as we reconfigure the national strategy around a Western New Monroe Doctrine sort of footing, we won't actually be pulling down capability and resourcing to places strategically important foreign interventions, like, or foreign presence like the Indo-Pacific or others. With a $1.5 trillion defense budget, which nobody believes is actually going to happen, you can have your cake and eat it too. You can continue to fund things at the previous levels, but then dump additional money onto pet projects and innovation without without robbing Peter to pay Paul, so to speak. So I think that that's likely what's going to be happening in the defense technology space. We're going to see the budget grow, new entrants will come in, everyone kind of wins, and I think that's the way forward.
I also want to make a note, just looking at this Frontiers roadmap. Space crushes all of these people. So like I look at the roadmap and I see just as many companies in the air category as I see space. And the air category has Skydio, for example, who makes small drones. SpaceX doesn't even need to be in the same, like the amount of money that flows to putting satellites into space and the amount of like technological leap that has to happen to manufacture those satellites, and like Frontier all by itself is skewing the numbers of all other frontiers. And the American space industry is extraordinary. It should be the thing that we're most proud of in the world right now. And let's hope that AI becomes the same level. But boy, it's wild to look at SpaceX and think, yeah, some of these other folks they're manufacturing folks. SpaceX is doing a whole different universe.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, but that's venture, right?
That's venture. Like you want to tie. It's just like with the NDS in some ways, right? The message is as important as the substance in some ways, because you're trying to build that thing.
I think reports like this, the trend lines they're describing, whether completely true or only partially true, will serve to continue inspiring new entrants. And I think that's probably a great thing. And once upon a time, we were a fresh-faced, bushy-tailed new entrant. Now we're jaded, hard-eyed, bastard, OG vanguards of the defense technology space. I don't think most of those things are true, by the way. I think we're still very optimistic.
I'm just a hater. I was born a hater. I'm going to die a hater.
So final word, Simon, defend that T-shirt, and then we'll wrap. Defend that T-shirt. What
Renee Hartfelt, incredible Richmond band from the mid 2000s. I don't even know how to describe post-punk, post-hardcore. Highly recommend.
Wow. Okay. I'll have to look up their touring schedule, see if they're coming through Bozeman anytime soon.
Long broken up. Singer's a dentist in Richmond now. He's the best dentist in Richmond.
No doubt. Well, with that, gents, thanks for a rousing conversation. For everybody out there, join us every week on the Goat Rodeo. Like us, follow us, subscribe, pass the link along to your friends. We want this community to be vibrant and alive. So pass along notes, send Simon your hate mail, and we'll see you next week. See ya.